of the Board Game Geek podcast, where we geek out about board games, the mechanisms behind them, and the people who create them. I'm your host, Candice Harris, and I'm here with the Geek Up Bits Queen and BGG Store Product Manager, Beth Heile. How are you doing today, Beth?
Still recovering from SPIEL, as I'm sure as are you, yes. Given that we are now exactly 2 days after the show. So we're a little bit more in the base register today.
Yeah, totally. I'm feeling the jet lag. We got back Monday, and I think we were up for about 23 hours by the time I actually went to sleep. And then we woke up at like 6 a.m. the next day. Our bodies are confused.
the price of gaming.
Totally. And even though we were both, Beth and I were both at SPIEL all day for 4 days with Eric, Lincoln, Nikki, and a few others from the BGG team, we didn't bump into each other at all because it's such a massive event. It blows my mind how big it is compared to something like Gen Con, which is the biggest board game convention in the States. Today, we're going to compare notes and discuss some games that weren't on our radars ahead of SPIEL 22, but after discovering them at the show, we're really excited to check them out and actually play them. And before we get into our SPIEL discoveries, I'd love to hear what you've been playing lately, Beth. So let's jump into fresh plays. So Beth, what have you been playing lately that's kind of standing out in your mind?
Oh, definitely the first choice would have to be Turing Machine, which is designed by Fabien Gradel and Johan Levet. It's published by Scorpion Mask. And it was originally, they brought about, I think, 3,000 copies to Gen Con a few months ago. They had another large batch available for SPIEL last week. And then it should hit full retail everywhere, at least in the States, in mid-November. So if you were not familiar with this game, this is a competitive deduction game, but deduction in very much the logic puzzle type flavor of deduction. You can play this by yourself at one player just to see if you can solve it in the minimum amount of information, but it's 1 to 4. And then each race to this number takes about 20 minutes. Now, this is a game that is completely unique and is by far easiest to teach if you were doing it. So I'm going to just summarize this very quickly by saying, think Mastermind. Where you would maybe, your opponent would set up a 4-digit color code and you say red, yellow, green, blue. And then the human on the other side tells you if you were right, partially right, or wrong. And then you change your next answer. So you're testing it. And basically your opponent serves as the computer. Well, in Turing Machine, the game does that on its own. And it does that all through manual little punch cards. So you don't need that person on the other side of the screen telling you what was right and what was wrong. The game will do it itself, which is really like mind-blowing. It reminds me of Spot It or Dobble, if you happen to play that in the EU. And it's just a shape matching game. There's one picture that overlaps across 2 cards, exactly one. But that is a 54 circle Venn diagram. And the math hidden behind that is astounding.
Wow.
This is the same where you think like, okay, this is pretty easy. Like I'm going to put a test number in. It's going to spit back. It's going to tell me what's right or wrong. But the math behind that is astounding.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah. And I think if it was done digitally, it wouldn't be as cool.
Yeah.
It's the fact that it's actual cardboard
analog
punch cards.
kind of machine.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. And it comes in the rule book. It has 20 challenges, which I went through very quickly. And then, online, there's an app which will put together another 2 million challenges.
Wow.
So that should keep anyone busy for a $40 price point for a long time.
Very cool. Yeah, I remember you guys were really excited about Turing Machine at Gen Con, and I've been wanting to play it ever since. Because you and Walt and a couple other people were just really saying how cool and interesting it is. And that sounds really cool.
Yeah, and it's the sort of thing where each challenge takes, which I say challenge, but it's each game takes 15, maybe 20 minutes. And then people meet and say, oh, let's do another one. I get this now. I want to try again. And then it's the sort of thing you do it until you want to stop doing it. In that, it's sort of one of my favorite fillers because you can do as many rounds. Oh, they still got 20 minutes left. Okay, let's do another.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a very satisfying. You can also, even if you don't win, if you realize that like, oh, I would have gotten a next turn, there's still a lot of satisfaction there. That like, okay, I knew what it was. You were just one turn ahead of me, but I got it. I knew what it was. So I like when you can still get personal satisfaction, even if you don't get the win.
That's cool. Yeah, I loved Mastermind growing up. So, you
too.
Throwing in that comparison makes me even more excited to play this. One day I will get to it.
Yeah. I know you've been saying that for a few months now.
I know. We just haven't recovered from Gen Con fully. I'm still playing new games from Gen Con. But so that's on my list to definitely check out.
Well, I'm sure there's other games on your list, though. How about you for your fresh plays?
Okay, so actually, one of my fresh plays is Pingyao First Chinese Banks. This is a game by Wu Xiang, and Jing Studio published it. And I randomly kind of discovered this at Spiel last week. And it's actually a game that came out in 2017, but I guess there was a Kickstarter with an expansion in 2021. Either way, I had never heard about it until I met up with Frank West, the designer of the Isle of Cats, Bronislav from Game in a Nutshell, and Corey Thompson from Dice Tower News. And Frank had a bag of games, and I'm like, hey, like, what are you picking up today? And he had it in his bag along with another game that I'll talk about later. Spoiler alert. And I was just like, I had never heard of it. And Bronislav was saying, oh, that's a great game. So the next day I went to the booth, checked it out. Matt and I did a demo and I ended up buying it. So I got it to the table just last night, a day after getting back from Spiel. And the deal is, Pingyao is a 1 to 4 player game that's an economic dice worker placement game where we are taking on the roles of famous Jin merchants in the Qing dynasty, opening up a network of banks in China. You play over 8 rounds, and the goal of the game is to be the wealthiest at the end of the game. The dice worker placement is really interesting because you start the game with a D6, a 6-sided die, and then also a D4, one of those little pyramid guys, and you roll them, and on the main game board, there are spaces for die results of 1 through 6, and everybody puts their dice, and your dice are like matching your player color, which is green for me, and I know that would be green for you too.
Green for both of us.
But then you you place dice in turn order, but starting from any dice that are the highest number. So if there are any dice on the board in spot 6, it goes in turn order. So whoever's first player can play their 6 die out on the board, so on and so forth until you go up to 1. And the way you place the dice is really interesting because playing a 6 on a space is a weaker effect than playing a 1 on a given action space. But you're getting to place first if you're putting a 6 down. So there's like kind of a balancing thing there, which is interesting. The other thing is the worker placement is such that if I put a 6 on one action, someone could later put a 5 on that same action, and you kind of bump the other die to like a resting area. But you have to pay the difference. So if I put a lower number where there was a higher number, I have to pay the difference in coins. And then likewise, if because you're able to also pay money to reroll dice before you take an action, if I'm coming in with a 5 and let's say you were the last person to take an action and you put a 2 there, and I take the action with a 5, I get $3 or 3 coins from the bank. So you're able to reuse spaces unless you're using a die with the same number. So once there's a 5 on a space, no one else could put a 5 there. But you can put any other number, you might make money or lose money. So anyway, it's got like a real kind of unique dice worker placement system. And what you're basically doing is you're creating this network of banks where you're building different banks and you're giving out loans and taking loans, and you're backing your banks with these silver ingots. And at the end of the game,
we're on a silver standard.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, you need silver to like start to build banks onto your player board. And there's this whole like really interesting way you move money around, but you're ultimately trying to make money, get more silver so you could open more banks, put more silver on banks because they give you income during the income phase. And at the end of the game, all of your silver ingots that you get are worth a point. Every 10 coins is worth a point. And then there are like also these 2 tracks you can work up, and like building level 2 and level 3 banks give you points. Then also the banks that you're building, they're like tiles on your player board. They have special abilities, which you'll need to get these like worker tokens to put on them to activate them. So it's a real interesting game. The only thing that's a bit challenging is that the dice rolling can be rough.
I was going to say, I'm getting a Castles of Burgundy vibes listening to you explain this, in that it's a very strategic game. You have to plan out moves, but you're also basing those moves on dice rolling that you can't anticipate.
Right.
And yes, you can modulate it with spending workers and whatnot, but occasionally it can be really rough, being like, I just don't need double 5s. Damn it, there's double 5s.
Yeah. Totally. I have not played Castles of Burgundy in a while. I remember. I know.
In a while. Okay.
Yeah, in a while. Acceptable. I love it, though. I love it. Well, can we play it at BGG Con?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. It's a date.
Okay.
I'm always up for Castles of Burgundy.
But yeah, so it's also like a game where you can read the rules, but if you're playing with all new players for the first time, it's not going to be clear how things work together. Even though at the beginning of the game, there are only 4 action spaces, and all but one of the actions are like really kind of simple. But like kind of as you go through your first game, you're realizing like, oh, this is how these things kind of work together. Again, I think people who are anti-dice rolling games, you might want to shy away from this. But if you're someone who doesn't mind a little bit of randomness from dice and, you know, get excited by the challenge of making something work with whatever you got, it's a really cool game. And I think it has a decent solo mode that I want to try too. And now, have you ever heard of this game, Pingyao?
No. So just so we can remind people what we're talking about, this is Pingyao, First Chinese Banks.
Yeah.
No, I've never heard of it. I've never heard of the publisher. So this is one of the things that I think all board game conventions are useful for. Is, you know, totally. Yeah, what's in your bag? Oh, I've never seen that before. And then you get talking about a game, and then you go buy it. This is what happens to us all.
Totally. Yep. So that's Pingyao. What else have you been playing lately, Beth?
I've been playing a lot of Evergreen, which is designed by Halmir Hach, and it is published by Horrible Guild. He's also the designer of Photosynthesis, which is published by Blue Orange. And you're definitely going to get a similar thematic feel in this. You're growing things in a globe, and the sun affects whether your things that you're growing score points, and things that cast shade may prevent some things from scoring points. So like all that's going to be familiar from Photosynthesis. But the real difference with Evergreen is that there's 2. One is that each player has their own playboard. So if I make a bad decision, I only have myself to blame. Whereas versus Photosynthesis, where you're all playing on a shared board and someone could put a tree there and you're like, I hate you forever because you blocked my perfect thing. Like, that's not going to be an issue here. If the only things being placed on your world are the things you chose to put there. So if you screwed up, that's on you. The second thing that's different is that you're going to start by doing some open drafting. You're going to have a bank of biome cards. I'm just going to call them regions because that's a little bit easier. They used really awesome vocabulary in this game that does not match so well for being fluent on a podcast. Like aridity, which is things becoming arid. Yeah, so like skull cards, done. But you're going to take turns picking cards from these displays. So one card will also come with a first turn marker, so that's going to balance into your decision making. And that card's going to lock you into a region. So people might remember that from Kingdom Builder back in the day with Donald X and Queen Games. And so you have to decide, that card also locks you into an action. You get to do both an action and a bonus power. Bonus power, you can do whatever. The bonus power is on the card. The action, you can choose whatever you want.
Cool.
But your bonus power and the region are locked in via the card. So that's really going to affect which one you pick. And I really like the balance is that you want to grow your things to be tall because the full grown trees are the things that will score you points at the end of the game. You'll get points for having the largest forest, so the largest blob of full grown trees. You also get points because one card in each round will not get selected and it will go to the side and will become a scoring card. And different regions will build up these scoring cards. And then each full grown tree in that region will be worth that many points at the end of the game. So that's a huge power to the person who has last choice, is then they are also choosing which card goes into the scoring area, which I loved. I thought that was fascinating. It really took the sting out of only having a choice of 2 cards.
That's cool.
But if you're building big trees, it means you're also blocking the smaller stuff from getting sun, so those are your short-term points, whereas biggest forest and the end of game region scoring are your long-term points. I love that push and pull between short-term, long-term. So this game, I really scratched that itch. And me personally, unless we're doing deduction or puzzle game, I like sort of that parallel solitaire nature, which this like, yay, go away. This is my world. I get to do what I want. And then the icing on the cake for me was just really beautiful components. The art is neat and really interesting. The pieces are quite small, so in that it's a tiny bit fiddly, but the boards are double layered, so they do sit in a trench, and that does help things from getting just occasional fiddliness rather than disaster if you elbow your board by accident. So that's something that I've definitely been leaning towards the 45-minute or less as we head into convention season, because this is the triple threat of Gen Con, Spiel, and BGG Con. I find whatever games I'm playing get shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. You'll see that in my Spiel picks coming up next. I think my longest game, I have one 90-minute game and everything else was under an hour. So
impressive.
That's definitely the way I'm trending. So yeah, my second pick would be Evergreen, which is published by Horrible Guild.
Awesome. Yeah, I played Photosynthesis, that was actually one of probably my first 10 games of modern board games getting into the hobby.
That's exciting.
Yeah. And I think I've only played it once or twice, but I've held on to it all these years just because I think it's just such a cool light game, and that the table presence just is really, really, really nice.
This one does not have that table presence. Yeah. Photosynthesis looks like $1 million from 20 feet away. I think also though, as we'll talk about later about one designer reimagining their own work, this is one example of that. You'll have a game you're going to talk about coming up soon where, I like to see how one designer has evolved their own ideas.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And I think this was a really neat, they wanted a more solitaire experience. Photosynthesis is the competitive head-to-head. This is the more parallel solitaire experience. And yet you can see that thread of, okay, I'm going to take this. Maybe regret is probably too strong of a word, but maybe he thought I wish I had done this, or I wish this had been possible.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be a little bit harder, but that's not Blue Orange's catalog. It's neat, the way an author will evolve or a screenwriter will evolve. It's neat to see that in board games as well.
Totally. So that's Evergreen. So the other game that I got a chance to play, which is a brand new Spiel 22 release, is WordCraft. This is by Christian Geoff, and it's from Artipia Games. And this is a word game with area control for 2 to 4 players. It plays in about 25 to 40 minutes. And last night, after playing Pingyao, I broke it out with my friend Chris, and we played a 2-player game. And I was like, I don't know how well this game's going to work with 2 players, but I wanted to get just a feel for it. I was kind of excited to try it. And it actually is surprisingly really good with 2 players, even though it has like area control in it. But the deal is you have different decks of cards representing the entire alphabet. So 1 card per letter, but then the letters are kind of dispersed into different decks, which are different colors. Like you have a blue deck, a yellow deck, a green deck, a red deck, and a purple deck. And you play over 3 rounds, and you will shuffle each deck, and then you make kind of like a stack where you reveal cards in rows. So you'll have 2 cards from the blue deck, and then you'll have, on top of that, you'll have 3 cards from the yellow deck, 3 cards from the green deck, and then 2 cards from the red deck, then 2 cards from the purple deck. And just to give you an idea, the purple deck cards are worth more points because that's where you're going to find your Z's, your X's, your harder to use letters. And then the blue deck, you know, on the opposite end has easier letters, vowels that you can use in a ton of words. Every player has a set of cubes. I think you start with 18 cubes and you have 24 total that you'll get more each round. So you have 18 little wooden cubes of your color. And when it's your turn, you have to come up with a word that's at least 3 letters, but it could be more. And then you say the word, and then you put a cube on every letter that hits, you know, that makes up that word. And you have to use only letters that are on the board that you've set up with the cards that are revealed. But you could use letters twice. Like, so if I had tree as an example, I would put 2 of my cubes on E because I've used the E twice in that word. So you'd go back and forth doing this, but there's one other thing to it. You have these achievement cards. So you have 4 different achievement cards that you'll put out for a game. And the game comes with, I think, for each type of achievement, I think there were like 3 or 4 different cards. So you can kind of like create a random mix of these 4 different types of achievements. And it could be something like yesterday's game we had, if you make a word that has exactly 5 letters, that's an achievement. If you make a word where you use blue and green, a pair of blue and green letters, like back to back, that's an achievement. If you make a word that starts with green and ends with a blue letter, that's an achievement. And then the other one was using the same color letter multiple times. So in the case of like tree, if you needed to use blue 2 times and the E was blue, or the E would be blue, you would unlock that achievement. So every time you play a word and put your cubes out on the letters, you can also put a cube out on, you could put 1 cube on all of the objectives if you meet any of them, the achievements. So the achievements get scored at the end of the game. You get experience points from them, and the more cubes you have on them, the more points you'll get from each achievement. So I think like if you just have 1 cube on an achievement, you get 2 points. But if you have 5 cubes or more, I think you get like something like 15 points, if I recall. But each round, you score area control for your cubes on the different letters for the words you placed. And each card has like a different, value of points. Well, not necessarily different. Like I think they range from like 2 to 7 points you can get on different letters. So not only are you trying to think of words, but you're trying to like hit these achievements. And then you're also trying to like win area control so that you get to score that letter at the end of the round. So it's really, really interesting. And the ties are friendly for the area control. So that's another kind of interesting angle. The other thing is like in a 2-player game, because again, I've only played it at 2 players so far. I was sitting there waiting for Chris to take his turn, and I had my word that I was going to say. It was 5 letters. I'm ready. I see it. I'm going to use a P, which is a lot of points and everything. And Chris goes, my word was paint. by the way. And Chris goes and I'm just sitting there hoping he doesn't see it. And then Chris says, pain. And I was like, yes, he didn't notice that he could have said paint. So I was able to still make my paint after him. And of course, he was kind of like kicking himself for not realizing that he could have scored the exactly 5-letter, achievement. But the other thing that's really interesting is you have a limited amount of cubes. So my last turn, I only had 4 cubes because as you're putting cubes on achievements, you're losing them from your pool to put on letters for future rounds. So you're reducing the amount of turns you could have. So I ended up with 4 cubes and I'm sitting there I really want to make a 5-letter word so I could score that achievement again. Couldn't do that. So I was I could either just make a 4-letter word or I could try to make a 3-letter word and unlock another achievement. But the problem was I came up with a great word again, vanity. Because using those V's and those harder, more challenging letters give you more points. I was so bummed that I couldn't do it because I ran out of cubes. But then I'm just sitting there hoping on Chris's last turn that he didn't think of it. And he didn't. So anyway, that's WordCraft. I don't know if you saw it or know anything about it.
Yeah, if memory serves, it's a small box for how much it punches. It like a 7 Wonders dual size box.
Yes,
like a small square. And certainly I was able to go over and talk with Artipia at Spiel, but I generally avoid games where it's letters built into words games. I'm very good at vocabulary and word association games. I am terrible at word construction games, abysmal, which is odd because I love vocabulary. And I just can't see a word from individual letters. So I skirted that one on purpose on my end.
Gotcha. Well, you might like it. And I will tell you, just because you were talking about the box size, this is a perfect candidate for Eric Martin to cut down the box. Because I opened the box, I'm like, it has cards and a bag of cubes. And the cards are these small kind of square-shaped cards that you do not need this box to be as big as it is. So I might have to study Eric's cut the game box videos and transform this a little bit to make it more compact.
Good. That's your bonus project.
Exactly. So that was WordCraft. But now I think we should kind of talk about our Spiel discoveries. So Beth, you have been to Spiel way more times than me, and you've been with BGG. What was your experience like overall at the convention, and how did it kind of feel compared to previous years?
Yeah, this is trip number 11 for me, and
wow.
I was me and my husband John were the only ones from the BGG team that went last year. We were a team of 2, and this year definitely felt like much closer back to pre-pandemic, to the before times, as my sister would put it. The reported attendance is a little too early to have the firm numbers from the Messe. The early report is that it was about 147,000 people there last week. They were expecting 190, but again, it's too early to have official numbers yet. In 2019, they had 209,000, which is still the highest watermark that they've had for attendance yet. And then after 2020, last year in 21, they had 96 and change. So they were just about at half strength last year. And likewise for the exhibitors, they were only at 620 exhibitors last year. They were at just about 1,100 this year. And then their high water mark again was 2019, and that was at 1,200. So what was interesting is that they had almost the exact same amount of exhibitors as they did in 2019 this year, but a decent notch, probably less in terms of crowds. again, we don't have the official numbers yet. But the thing that definitely helped feel a little bit more towards normalcy was that they did require masks, but they didn't have a proof of vaccination, which as an American getting registered into the German vaccine system was challenging. We actually had to go through a pharmacist who literally manually helped us input our information because the system would not accept an American address. Wow. So we didn't have to deal with that. But I'm glad we had masks. I think, it's still a big crowd. We still heard some reports of positive cases. So I'm glad that there was some precautions in place. Yeah, but the thing that really jumped out at me as being different from last year to this year is the family presence again. Spiel is a very family-friendly show. Tons of the booths will set up kid areas, kids games, all the way down to toddler level games. And so you'll see tons of babies and snuggies just being carried around, lots of kids in strollers, lots of kids napping, which I wish I could do that too. And there were, not surprisingly, very few families there last year. And I really felt like there was that full complement of families back again this year. And definitely the part that sort of sticks in everybody's mind is Saturday is the single largest attendance day. And it's
so crazy.
It hits the point where we call it the penguin waddle because the halls are so crowded that all you can do is just sort of waddle, shuffle forward. Yeah. And if you're having meetings like we are, then you have to plan that if you were going from opposite corner to opposite corner, it can take upwards of over a half an hour to even 45 minutes to get from one end of the hall to the other on Saturday.
Big difference. So, yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah. I loved moving around last year. I had my rolling bag. I could swing my arms around. Oh, yeah, it was wonderful. And nope, that was a 1-year reprieve. No more.
Yeah.
But the one thing I wanted to pass along to people, because it's something that makes me very proud of our industry, of our hobby, is that the publishers, who are technically competitors with each other, will still combine forces to work together to make something neat. And this year they made, and again, this horrible guild is kind of accidentally my star of the show for this podcast. They made a Simio deck. I will let people go look Simio up on BGG if you're not familiar with it, but it's a quickie co-op deduction game, and it's the size of a deck of cards. And all these publishers got together and they all basically donated their cover art to make a Simio deck that instead of characters, that it was all covers from board games that were all released at Spiel this year. And then all these publishers that participated then all had these decks and they were all giving them out for free with a certain level of purchase. So you could get them across all of these different publishers and that's just cool. I know it benefits everyone, but it's still a level of cooperation. It just warms my heart.
Yeah, it's so cool. I actually picked one of those up for Derek because he didn't end up making it out to Spiel with us, but he was like, "Hey, Candice, if you see this, could you get it?" So I have to mail it to him. But yeah, that's really cool camaraderie there.
And then we had, for me personally, I did have a fun project. We did not run a BGG booth this year, which means I also was not running a BGG store this year. And I know a lot of frequent customers of the store who live outside of the US. The shipping situation currently is really frustrating. And I felt really bad that we wouldn't have a store. And yes, I'm working on things. TBD. I'll get back to you on that one. I'm actively working on out of US stuff. Don't worry. But because I felt bad, I had a whole bunch of extra products here at my house. So I packed them in my suitcase and I wrote on the store thread for September. If you can find me, specifically me, number 81, because we all wear our jerseys with our unique numbers on them, I will give you a little gift. And I would just give away these things that I packed in my suitcase. Well, this ended up being delightful.
Yeah.
Because I had a couple, and Candice was here for one of them. I had a couple people that they would come up very tentatively. "Excuse me." I said, "Yes." "Are you Beth?" "Yes." "Oh my God, we found her! We found her!" I felt like, "Where's Waldo?"
Pretty much. Yeah, people were I had a couple people come up to me who were looking for you as well.
Right. I had one person who said, I'm really sorry, but I have to admit that I followed somebody in a purple jersey because I was trying to figure out if they were you. It's fine. Or, I've been searching for you for the entire show. I was like, I hope that's not the only thing you've been doing.
You need to do this every year, Beth.
Scavenger hunt. I made myself a scavenger hunt, and I had wonderful conversations with people from, all over outside the US, which is great. That was the whole point. And, people got to walk away with a fun little thing, and it was delightful for me.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that was a real highlight of the show. So yeah, that's something I might do in the future. Is like, if you can find this BGG person, then this thing will happen and it'll be cool.
I ended up so I went to Spiel in 2019 for the first time. That was pre BGG for me. But it was awesome. But this time was just much more special. Because I've been working with so many international publishers for so long, doing BGG News and Cardboard Creations. And I've never gotten the chance to meet them. So I got to meet so many awesome people and new people that I wasn't even expecting to meet. And then I also bumped into a bunch of game designers that I met for the first time, like Vital Lacerda, Martin Wallace, Stefan Feld. It was just, David Terzi was there, and it almost felt like I had known him because we've done, video chats together, but I'm like, I've never met you in real life. So, that was really exciting for me walking around, and, a lot of people came up to me as well and were just, they're excited about the podcast, which is really cool. That was really nice. So thank you to everybody who stopped and said hi. It warms my heart. But then I just all day, sometimes people would come up to me and say, oh, so what's the best thing you've seen so far? And my brain would just be mush because I saw so many different games every day that I haven't even had a chance to fully process, what was the most exciting thing versus it was all just really exciting for me. But that's why I wanted to talk to you today, because it's we didn't cross paths at the convention. So I'm sure we saw a bunch of different things and kind of discovered new games. So what are some of the games that you kind of checked out at Spiel that you weren't really on your radar, but you're now excited about them?
Yeah, and let me preface by saying, usually for us who work, our days are 12, if not 15 hours long. So of my 5 games that we're going to talk about, I've only played one. So I just want to say that outright, that this is literally just it was pitched to me, or I read the back of the box or something, and I'm excited about it. I've only had the chance to play one. I like to joke that at any convention, the only game I want to play is the game of sleep, and I want to win. So that was true for this. Oh, yeah. No ties. I want to win. Okay, so the first game that I'm excited about is called Take a Seat, which is designed by Uli Pujanis and Ferran Rendeleyas. And this is published by Salt and Pepper Games, which is a Spanish publisher out of Madrid. It's a tiny box, but it plays 1 to 6 players. It is a 30 minutes. Again, I'm definitely on a filler kick lately. And I'm going to call it a roll and write only because you're writing on dry erase boards. But if you've played Mosaic back in the day, this is more similar to Mosaic in that you rolled dice and you arranged them into a shape, and then everybody drew that on their board. In this one, you're filling in a circle on tickets that have a grid. And so you're basically closing off one box of the grid. And then you draw the shape that is left behind. So you've now eliminated one square out of that grid, and then you're drawing whatever shape is left behind. And the other person's doing the same thing on their the ticket board, and then on their they're drawing the shape on their theater. Then you swap ticket boards. Your theater stays put, but now you're swapping ticket boards. So now I've acquired this ticket board that has one circle scratched out in my opponent's color. So now I'm going to scratch out some other circle and again draw a shape on my theater board, and then we're going to swap again. And so these ticket boards keep going back and forth and back and forth. Your theater stay put until we hit the end of the game, which is when one of the two is filled. I don't remember which one. And then you're going to score points. Now, if you have filled in a lot of circles on one of the tickets, then you can score majority points that way. If you achieve a lot of objectives of getting lines or rows or shapes or things like that on your theater, you can score a lot of points that way. But I like this because a lot of this is simultaneous play. So even when you ramp it up to 6, it's not going to lengthen it's not going to overstay its welcome. It's also an overlapping neighbor game in the vein of Seven Wonders or Between Two Cities, that when you have more than 2 players, you're still only swapping boards with 2 people. One turn, you'll all rotate your ticket boards 1 slot clockwise, and then you'll swap them back 1 slot counterclockwise. So you'll only ever go back and forth between your left neighbor and your right neighbor. I really like overlapping neighbor games like that. So I love quickie, dry race, things like that. And I love the theater. So it's like, I'm very theme susceptible. So it's like a great theme, 30 minutes, dry race, roll and write, where I get to design the shape I'm writing. Dun, 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 dun.
Sold. Yeah, I really like the theater theme on this one, but I didn't know too much about it. I heard the name, like someone else was talking about this, but I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, and Take a Seat is normally Salt and Pepper has been doing localized copies of their publishers' games. This is their own game. They are the primary publisher of this game, and printed in a gazillion languages in the rule book. So I'm thrilled that they're now creating their own games. I think this is, and this was one of a couple that they had, and I'm delighted that I think this is a great start for them of publishing their own titles. So yeah, I'm really, really excited to give that one a try.
Sweet. So I actually got hip to a game at Spiel from your husband, John. And that game is Crossing Oceans. It's the new Mac Gertz game, the designer of Concordia and Navigator and also Transatlantic. And it's published by PD Verlag. So John kind of mentioned this to me, and I didn't even know this had popped up. You know, I perused the Spiel preview list a lot, but I've still clearly missed things. But this is a re-implementation of Mac Gertz's game Transatlantic, which came out in 2017. It has a similar theme, but it's a whole new game and a big historical map. And Transatlantic was card-driven, never played it, but allegedly card-driven, whereas Crossing Oceans is a rondel game. And I think what you're doing, again, I've not played this yet, but possibly next week, because I am excited to try it, and I did pick it up. But you're acquiring a bunch of modern steamships on the market, and the game features 50 historical ships. And then you're building a network of trading posts and coal bunkers so that you can expand the capability of your fleet. And I played Navigator back in the day once. Well, back in the day, probably in the past 2 years. I haven't been playing board games that long. And I love Concordia. So I would consider myself a fan of Mac's work. So I'm just, and also John's enthusiasm and excitement for it just kind of got me really interested in it. So
he is a diehard Gertz fan. He's fanboys. It's adorable.
Yes. Yeah. So, that is Crossing Oceans.
When we should mention that this was the game I was referencing earlier, that a designer revamping on their own work, the relationship between photosynthesis and Evergreen is similar to Transatlantic and Crossing Oceans. So.
Totally.
All right, for my second game, I'm picking Overbooking, which is designed by Filippo Landini, and it's published by Hooch. It's for 2 to 4 players, takes 30 minutes, again, hitting that sweet spot of under an hour. And the closest comparison I would give to this game is Beastie Bar, in that in Beastie Bar, you're lining up 6 animals, and when you hit that trigger point of 6 animals, you figure out which ones get to go in the bar, and some of them won't make it in, and they don't score, and that's a real bummer for you. This one is similar, except there's 3 hotels instead of 1 bar. Each hotel wants a certain particular kind of patron. They want nobles, they want monks, they want merchants. So they definitely will prioritize things. So and unlike Beastie Bar, where you're playing your cards face up, in Overbooking, you're playing your cards face down. But there is one hint on the back of the card that gives you a seal that is going to give a clue as to what kind of card you've played. Not the value, but just what type. And that might allow, basically that's cards within a certain family. You will score bonus points if a lot of one family is staying at one hotel. So that might inspire you to place certain cards in a hotel with this partial information of what other people have played there. You can place up to 4 people in the front of the hotel. So that basically they're forming a line, getting ready for the doors to open, but you can sneak 2 people in the back and they are going to cut into line in different places. Ooh. So that's another easy decision you can make. So yes, while there's only 3 hotels and you're just putting the cards in order based on who, if I go first, I get the first spot in this hotel and maybe you would choose to be in the second spot. You can really screw up that order by putting people in the back of the hotel and having them come and bust into your line. Once all the hotels have been filled up to 5 people, then you resolve them all and you flip them all over and you figure out, if a hotel has 15 beds and this card it's 7, then they take up 7 of the 15 beds and you figure out who's left. Some get turned away. Those that go in score. Yay, points for you. Most points wins. And you play some amount of rounds that I don't remember because I haven't played it yet because I was in a meeting. It was sort of a random lunchtime meeting where I ended up meeting with like 3 people accidentally. I'm not sure how that happened. And my friend Ezra walked by and he held up Overbooking. He's like, "Oh my God, this is amazing." I was like, "It's literally in my bag." So that got me really excited about it.
Very cool. I did not even see this. Like, this sounds interesting. And I actually used to have Beastie Bar. I might still have it. But
there's many flavors of Beastie Bar now. But yes, you could go replace that or augment it with Overbooking.
Cool. Well, you know how I said John hipped me to Crossing Oceans? Well, my next game I hipped John to, and we both ended up coming home with. It's a game called Corrupt Parliament, which I had to do a lot of research to actually find it. And this is another one that I discovered from Frank West, along with Pingyao. But basically, it's designed by Alan Wang, and it's published by Board Game Nations. I believe there are a couple of publishers kind of listed on the box, but it was at the Board Game Nations booth. And it's a negotiation game for 4 to 6 players. It plays in about 1 to 2 hours. And in the game, I haven't played it, by the way, so this is just super high level, but it sounded very intriguing to me. And I had a moment where I was like, no, I don't have room to get it. And then I ended up going back the next day to get it. It's a big box with really cool artwork. But in the game, we are new legislators controlling resources in a bunch of different industries like entertainment, there's red light, land development, medicine, illegal private banking, and we have
a real banking kick.
Yeah, it seems like it. That's my theme today. But we have to negotiate with each other to pass proposed laws that get, these laws get proposed each round, and you're trying to pass laws that are beneficial to you. Then you also have to kind of secure brokers on your side and stand for re-election and just gain as much money as you can, because the goal of the game is to have the most money after 3 rounds. But there's also there's a cool thing where you can bribe each other, and you have these secret negotiating little brown bags where I could put some money in to bribe you to maybe, pass this law. And maybe I only put $2 in there for you, but you tell everybody, oh, Candice paid me a lot, So there's all sorts of sneaky stuff that you can do. And then there's also this slight stock market element to it where you have this chart that reflects the dirty money from the different industries that kind of fluctuates. So I don't know. I don't know much more about it than that, but I was like, I need to take this home because I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it. And it just sounded super intriguing. And then I told Beth's husband, John, about it. And he's like, get me a copy too when you get it.
Yeah, you got as far as bribing. I think he's like, I want
it. So that is Corrupt Parliament.
For my third choice, I did Troublez, which is spelled with a Z at the end, which is designed by Peter Wojtaszek, and it's published by Albi. And this is the only one I got to play. I got to play most of a game while I was in a meeting with the owner of Albi, Libor, who is a delight. 2 to 6 players. Again, love how many players can squeeze into a tiny box. That is awesome. 30 minutes. That's apparently my magic number for this show. It's got a fun Halloween theme, which I totally recognize is going to turn some people off. But if you look at the cover, just look past that, because the art is, it's set dressing. It's not part of the core of the game. And it's a push your luck game. You draw a card. If you can find a place to put it, you could choose to draw another card. There's your push your luck. If you can't play it, your turn ends, and every other player at the board gets a single card as a reward. But if you choose to stop before you get stuck, then you get a big reward, which you get to choose all the cards of a single row. Now, so what chooses whether or not you get stuck? Well, you have 3 rows of cards. They have to be in ascending order, so like 2, 4, 5. If there's some special cards in there, you can only have 1 of each. You can't have duplicates of the special cards. And you also can't have identical colors next to each other. Totally doesn't matter what's on the other rows. Just each row is its own island. And if you can't find a legal place to put a card, you're done. So, it's that easy. But as you're collecting these cards, you don't get to score them until you get a run of 5 or 4 of a kind. And at that point, you pause the game ever so briefly for yourself, saying, oh, I'm doing some scoring for myself. Flip one of them over. It now becomes 10 points instead of, and if you, if the cards you've collected don't happen to be it fit into one of those 2 scoring categories, each one is worth 1 point. Most points wins. And the end game ends when the deck runs out. So it was one of those games that reminds me like No Thanks, or Kenichi's Llama from Amigo.
Gotcha.
That when you're listening to it, or The Mind, when you're listening to it, you're like, this seems dumb. I'm literally I'm just flipping over a card and putting it somewhere. Like, that seems dumb. Is that it? And then you play it and you think, wait a minute, this is really subtle and
That's
brilliant.
cool.
Those are some of my favorite games. I already waxed philosophic about hidden math behind games. Yeah, this is another category I love where it just seems so obvious, but then you play it and you're like, wow, it's not. So that was one. So all I ask for people is check it out. Don't be scared by the Halloween theme. It's cute. It's not scary, spooky. It's cutesy without being kiddish, if you understand the difference that I mean there. And yeah, it's in a tiny, small card box like The Mind, but plays up to 6 people, which is pretty awesome. Yeah. So that's Troublez, spelled with a Z at the end.
Very cool. Another one that I did not see, but I'm very interested to try now.
It's fine. You got all the heavy stuff. I got all the light stuff.
Well, here's something in between. My next game is Race to the Raft. It is a new game that's from Frank West, the designer of the Isle of Cats, and published by the City of Games. And it's coming to Kickstarter on October 18th, 2022. I will just say that in case I don't know when people are listening to this. But this game, and this is the reason I kind of was talking about the other games that I got hip to thanks to Frank West. But I was going to, Corey from the Dice Tower News, Corey Thompson, invited me to jump in a game to try Race to the Raft, since Frank had a prototype of it at Spiel. And we sat down with Bronislav from Game in a Nutshell. This was, I think, at about 6:45 in the evening, and the hall was kind of closed, but people were having their booth parties. We were right by the DeVere booth, and it was kind of a wild evening because they're like partying on the side. We're kind of sitting in the dark at a table checking out this game. But Race to the Raft is a cooperative path building, tile placement, social puzzle game for 1 to 4 players. social puzzle is the key here. The theme is the Isle of Cats is on fire, and we basically have to work together to get the cats, these different colored cats, to a raft, get them to safety because fire is spreading. And the game has 80, I think more than 80 different scenarios that you can play that kind of ramp up in complexity, similar to the missions in The Crew kind of thing. And we played, we played just the first, I think the most basic scenario together. And we did a 3-player game, and Frank just observed. So basically the board is set up, and I think the board kind of setup will vary depending on which scenario you're playing. But it looks like a bunch of different paths of different colors all kind of scrambled. And each cat, you have different color cats. So we had green, yellow, and blue because we were playing a 3-player game, so we had 3 cats. They start somewhere far from the raft we need to get them to, of course. And you have 4 decks of cards that are these path cards that are going to let us change the path and make the paths viable for the cats, since each cat can only move along a path that matches the color of the cat. So blue can only move on blue tiles, yellow can only move on yellow, so on and so forth. So you have these 4 different decks, I believe it was 4 different decks of cards, and the backs of the cards, it's one of those games where the backs of the cards kind of indicate the probability of what's going to be on the other side of the card. Yeah, so it's like if green is at the top on the back, it's like you're probably going to have a good chance of having a bunch of green path on this particular card. So we all have to draw 3 cards in this first scenario we did. We draw 3 cards. We cannot look at the cards. We can kind of discuss with each other like, oh, I'm going to take one from this deck. Oh, I think we should get a couple from the blue deck. So we all get our 3 cards, and then we can look at our cards now that everybody's picked their cards. And then we need to kind of discuss who's going to go first, who's going to take the first turn. Because after we decide, Beth, you're going to go ahead and go first, because maybe you said, hey, I could put something out that's good for blue, the blue cat, you know? So after we decide and you start your turn, we can't talk to you. You're on your own. And we just have to sit there, and we can't say, oh, put it like this or put it like that or you know, none of that. It's like you are on your own. So you'll play one of these path cards, and you're changing the way the board looks by placing a new card. And then after you place a card, you have to draw from this evil bag of polyomino fire tiles. And you have to place a polyomino, which are all these crazy, awful shapes. And you have to place one. Again, nobody can talk to you, Beth. You have to figure it out on your own where you're going to place this, because we will lose the game if one of the cats ever gets trapped behind the fire. So we have to be strategic with how we place these polyomino fire tiles so we're not cutting off any potential paths. Meanwhile, the other thing you could do is discard a card on your turn to make the cats move. Now, on the first scenario, you could make the cat move as far as it can by discarding 1 card, and then the cat lays down, and the next time we want to move that cat, we have to discard 2 cards. The reason behind that is because once we've collectively discarded 4 cards, there's a disaster, and we have to then draw an extra fire tile just once. Like, it's not like we have to draw 2 going forward. But anyway, so you have this whole like puzzle that we're working on together, but there's no quarterbacking or anything like that, because it's like when it's your turn, you get to like sit there and figure out how you want to play your path card and then where you want to place that fire tile. But we found, we ended up getting all the cats to safety in our first game, but it was very challenging. And Corey can attest, if you're kind of OCD about things, especially the way people lay polyomino tiles, you might be sitting there cringing. Like, I put one tile somewhere and he's like, it could have fit perfectly there, but you know, he can't say anything. I got to pick where I put it. So, anyways, it's such a cool game. Like it reminded me of, like, I feel like it has a little bit of like Magic Maze to it, where you're like, you can't talk to each other, and also like, hey, we need to collectively move these cats somewhere to safety. But then it also, again, has the crew vibe, where you have these scenarios that get a little more challenging and varied as you play through them. And there are different like tokens you'll start integrating in later scenarios. And I was like, I walked away from that game just kind of buzzing, thinking like, this is such a cool co-op experience.
Yeah.
You know?
It's giving me cooperative Karuba vibes, the Haba game, because that's about making a path for an individual color or discarding the thing to move the figure. Like, so yeah, but that's competitive, whereas this is cooperative. So
yeah.
I'm not surprised that Frank kind of took that. I guess this is our third one of not so much remixing one of his older titles, but remixing the theme of one of his older titles.
Yes, it's kind of, because it's kind of building upon the story of the Isle of Cats and everything.
The Isle of Cats is on fire!
Yeah. And like I said, he showed us some of the future scenario challenges, and we really enjoyed our game of it. So I'm excited about that. That is Race to the Raft, and that's coming. That was not a Spiel 22 release. That is something that's coming to Kickstarter soon, October 18th, 2022.
Well, for my number 4, this was a Spiel release. This is, I chose My Shelfie, which is designed by Matthew Durston and Phil Walker Harding, so 2 very frequent names in the industry, published by Cranio Creations. I'm sticking with my 30-minute jam. That's my sweet spot in this podcast, 2 to 4 players. And the easiest way to describe this is if Sagrada and Connect 4 had a baby, it would be My Shelfie. Because you're trying to fill up your bookshelf, but like Sagrada, and you have a secret objective and you want certain colors in certain places, again, just like Sagrada, and you're choosing 1 to 3 tiles from a central board, and there's rules about what tiles you can pick and whatnot. But once you get those tiles in your hand, you have to drop them into this vertical thing that is exactly like a Connect 4 board with more squares. And suddenly you have these colorful squares now in your grid. And if they match certain conditions, like having blobs of certain colors, or if they, there's public objectives, there's private objectives. And it's that easy. But I love games that have a really interesting component twist. Not surprisingly, that's kind of a big part of my job, making pickup bits. But sometimes it's just fluff. And it doesn't do anything for the game. Sometimes you get a magical moment. And the last time this happened to me, I would say, was probably Planet, blue-orange game, which had these dodecahedron magnet things that were a globe, and you were snapping the pieces on the side. I thought, this is either going to be amazing or it's going to be gimmicky and I'm going to hate it. It was amazing. So I'm interested to see which way this falls on. I was so intrigued when we were unpacking. We were, trying to nest boxes and boxes to pack them in our suitcase. And I didn't quite, I just picked it because of the theme, because I love to organize. So I was like, putting things on a bookshelf, sold. I didn't realize it had this whole vertical frame, and I'm pulling this out like, what is this? And then I looked at the picture, I'm like, wait a minute, this is like Connect 4. And it's even got a little base, cool. So when you pick it up, all the pieces fall through, so it's easy to clean up. And but okay, this is the thing this is the little touch that I really got to credit Cranio Creations to. So they made this vertical thing with a base, so it stays steady when you're playing, and then when you lift it up out of the base, all the pieces fall through. But then they also gave you a top piece, like they literally gave you a trim piece to make it look like a bookcase.
Oh, it's cool.
Totally unnecessary, and I completely appreciate it. So thank you, Cranio Creations, for making this plastic thing look exactly like a bookcase. It puts me in my happy place. So who knows? It's fairly abstract when it comes down to it. But like Azul, there could be a brilliant gem in there that happens to look beautiful in a unique way. So, and if you haven't heard the term before of taking a picture of your shelves to show off, it's called a Shelfie. So I love that they were using that vernacular
cool.
in the title of the game. So this is my Shelfie from Cranio Creations.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, I've not heard of that, and now after you play it, you'll have to tell me about it.
I will. Yeah, I'm gonna play that this weekend.
Well, you've got your 30-minute games, but guess what? I have a 20-minute game coming up. Okay. Dogfight. Rule the skies in 20 minutes. This is yes, 20 minutes. This is the latest game in PSC Games' like 20 minutes game series that started with Blitzkrieg, World War II in 20 minutes, and then last year Caesar Sees Rome in 20 minutes came out. I love both of those games, and I did not even realize that there was a new one on the horizon until I was wandering around and stopped at PSC's booth and saw Dogfight. And this is the other two games I mentioned, Blitzkrieg and Caesar, are designed by Paulo Mori, which was a draw for me. But this time, Dogfight is by Carlo A. Rossi. So this is a different designer. And in this game, it's World War I. It's another 2-player game, plays in about 20 minutes again. And we are rival aviators dueling with biplanes, which are those like double-winged planes from back in the day where they're kind of like
these are older World War I planes. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And we're kind of flying in the sky, trying to take each other down, more or less. So you play over up to 3 rounds, or if one plane is completely shot down, the other person automatically wins the game. But if it goes till the end of 3 rounds, whoever took the least damage wins the game. And similar to the other 20 minutes games, each person has a bag of tiles that you're drawing, and you'll draw them simultaneously, 1 tile at a time, and then you'll reveal it, and you're drawing it from behind your player's screen, and then you reveal it, and you're going to move your biplane a number of spaces. And the map is kind of like, it has these arrows and a big kind of circular loop, but then there are also these little sub loops that you can move through. And the way the colors are on the map, if you're in a certain zone, you'll have range to kind of attack your opponent if you're behind them. So if I move my plane somewhere because I'm like, oh, I'm going to get you, Beth, and then you end up playing a tile or whatever the effect is that lets you like do a loop, now all of a sudden you're behind me and can shoot me. So it seems like it seems a little bit different. I mean, Caesar is different than Blitzkrieg too, but again, I think this is going to be another interesting one where they achieve this kind of tension with a rules overhead that's really low, easy for anybody to get into, and it plays quickly. Have you ever played Blitzkrieg or Caesar?
I've played Caesar, yeah, and I totally agree. It's sort of like dipping your toes into war games without having to know all of the ins and outs, like without it feeling intimidating.
Yes.
And
yeah.
I found that so approachable as someone who's really never played war games. And it's a perfect bridge because they sit at this wonderful intersection of introducing you to some of those mechanics, but it's so snappy. I mean, it really is 20 minutes. Like they're not kidding.
Yeah. And I hope Dogfight has the amount of kind of tension that Caesar and Blitzkrieg do, because like you said, like I taught Blitzkrieg to a friend of mine who, yeah, if I put a war game in front of her and like, you know, a heavier war game, she wouldn't be into it, but she really she's very competitive, but she got into it, and we got ourselves into a situation where I'm sitting there sweating inside because if she does something, that's game over for me, but she doesn't know that I'm feeling that way. And it was just, I've had so many cool moments like that with that. And I haven't played Caesar as much, but I feel the same way about that. Like there's just like a lot of tension for something that's so easy to pick up rules wise and plays so quickly.
I would say a good comparison, if people were interested in that in a theme, I got that same feeling of tension from Watergate.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Which is a little bit longer. But if someone hasn't played a PCS game and you're kind of like, what do you mean by like attention? That if you've played Watergate, that would be a good, that emotional feel to it.
Totally. Yeah, you're learning a little bit about history in there, and there's so much tension from Watergate. It's so good. So anyway, that is Dogfight. Rule the skies in 20 minutes from PSC Games. What's your last game?
My final game is my longest entry, which is Come Together. I'm going to take this a little slow. There's 3 designers, which is Vegud Eliasson Stillerud. We've got Eilif Svensson and Osman Svensson. And they are, it was published by Chili Fox Games. It is for 1 to 6. Again, up to 6. Really liking the games that
That's
have
your thing.
that very well. 5 players is awful. That's the dreaded number. It's hard to find 5 because sometimes, we'll see. I am curious to play this with 6. We'll see if it's, sometimes.
Right.
And it plays in 90 minutes. So this is a worker placement game about putting on a Woodstock type festival over 3 days, aka 3 rounds. And you have to collect cards, and the cards you're collecting are the venue cards, which are your housing, so tents basically. The stage, you have to collect cards that are the stars, some up and coming, some established, and then the audience. And so as you're collecting all these cards, which give you all these cool things, at the same time, you're also having to balance that out with taking publicity. How do you get publicity? By not taking the cards. So that's the tricky bit. The other tricky bit is as you're putting out your workers, if you put out enough workers, you get a goodie right away. But you're putting out your worker right underneath a card. And of course, you want to take that card right away, but you can't. You got to wait until that whole area is activated by you or someone else. And when they activate the whole area, well, then you could take the card or throw away the card and take the publicity. And so I like that the whole thing, you can teach this game. Normally a worker placement game, you spend 3 years teaching every single worker placement space. So think Sulk and think Feast for Odin, which are 2 of my all-time favorite games. When I was, and I haven't played this yet, that what I'm getting from this is reading the rule book, but this seems so easy to teach. I mean, just ridiculously easy to teach, that there's these 4 areas. You get a goodie at this spot when you go there, and then you worry about the cards when that whole corner of the board is activated. And so cool. I'm really excited to see like how this might be a great introduction to a worker placement game. And it was also, if you look at the cover, I mean, it embraces its hippiness in the most delightful, joyous way possible. And I was in a very long line to pick up my copy. So I was standing in line for about 45 minutes. And you could tell every time someone walked by that pile of games, because you'd inevitably hear, "Come together, yeah, over me." And I got everyone humming in line. And that was pretty dang funny.
That's cool.
That was just a fun little bonus. But, you're... when you activate an area, you have this giant wooden piece that's got a huge peace sign on it. Some of the special tokens are flower power, and they're literally wooden flower tokens.
And the little meeples, the little like fan meeples.
Yep, they're dressed up.
They're so cute. Yeah.
Yeah, and they all represent different types of music, so that of different performers that are coming. So, there's this, meeples who want to listen to soul music and meeples who want to listen to folk music. I could see this. I mean, both Candice and I are musicians, so that might just be my personal interests I'm very theme susceptible. So I thought, okay, like I love the idea of that. I'm helping to put on a concert.
It's such a cool theme.
Yeah. And it's an art style. It was really easy to sort out the pieces when I was unpacking my suitcase because the art style was so distinctive. Very, very candy color, psychedelic.
Yep.
So I'm really excited to try this one to see if this might be a worker placement game when you just don't want to spend a half hour teaching and 3 hours playing. This might be that nice This feels like it would be a 20-minute teach and a 90 to 120-minute play. So that is pretty fast for a 6-player worker placement game. We'll see.
Wow,
Time will
6
tell.
players.
6 players.
Awesome.
I'm skeptical of the 6 players. I'll tell you that. I am skeptical of any worker placement that says it's for 6. Because it's still turn-based. And
Viticulture works. Viticulture Tuscany, I've done it 6.
Yeah.
And it worked out okay, if I recall. So maybe.
Worked out okay is not exactly a ringing endorsement for 6 players.
I honestly don't remember how much. Well, that's good because it wasn't terrible, or else I would remember that, right?
That's right. So if you guys want to check that out, that is Come Together, which is from Chili Fox Games, which I believe should be in general retail essentially now or in the incredibly near future.
Well, my last game is Unconscious Mind. This is a new game that's actually going to Kickstarter at some point, and it wasn't on my radar. It's designed by Laskus, Johnny Pack, Yoma, and Antonio Zax, and it's published by Fantasia Games, the company that published Endless Winter Paleo-Americans. I actually was walking by on my way to a meeting, and Johnny Pack was standing around and kind of said hi and introduced himself to me, and then I stood there with him and he kind of gave me an overview of the game, and it looked really eye-catching, and the title alone kind of drew me in a bit from all their signs in the booth and everything and the artwork. But it is a 1 to 4 player game that blends worker placement, engine building, multi-use cards, and action programming. It's set in Vienna in the early 1900s, and each player is kind of a part of the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society, which is led by Sigmund Freud. So it's kind of based on that time period where everybody was kind of, I guess, following Freud's theories and getting into psychoanalysis. And your goal, each player's goal, is to master different therapeutic techniques and establish a practice and then grow your clientele. And then you basically are trying to delve into your clients' dreams and their unconscious minds to help them recover from various traumas and complexes. And in the game, it has these cards that kind of remind me of the art from Dixit a little bit, but maybe a little bit more defined, that are representing your client's dreams. And as a result of you helping to treat people, they're going to live happier and more productive lives. So the other thing you can do is you can publish volumes of your groundbreaking work, which will get cited by other researchers who come after you, which will further your legacy. This one just kind of, it seemed like it had a bunch of interesting mechanisms, and I thought the theme was really, really unique. And the components, I guess if I was checking out maybe a near finished prototype of it, I was really blown away by the art and components, and it just sounded like something a little unique. Did you happen to pass by that one?
I've been following that one. Before Spiel, I wish there was some sort of award for board game cover art, because the cover of that is spectacular. And very susceptible to theme, and that's a theme I'm very personally interested in. Yeah, so you're right. I don't know exactly. They haven't announced when the Kickstarter is going to open up. They're only in that you can sign up for the notifications at this point, but they didn't have a projected date. So TBD on that one. But they had announced that it was up and coming, I think maybe May or June earlier this year. And gotcha. John, who we've mentioned, my husband, a couple times before, is a social worker. So he is a psychotherapist. And so he's very personally interested in this game as well.
So he's going to crush us at this?
Oh, I'm sure. This is why he loves negotiation games. This is why I don't play negotiation games with him, because for the sake of our marriage, would not be pretty.
Awesome. Well, Beth, it has been so awesome to talk to you as always. I'm looking forward to actually playing some games with you in a month at BGG Con.
Yes, and That's the show where we actually get to spend some time and play games more than the game of sleep.
Cool. Well, I will catch you soon. And I really enjoyed hearing about all the games that were on your radar because they weren't on mine. Aside from Come Together, I knew about because I demoed, but the other ones were all kind of new to me. So it's cool hearing about them.
Thank you for having me on. I love talking about board games and Spiel, and it's always fun to share some of those observations.
We will for sure do it again. You've been listening to the Board Game Geek podcast, produced and edited by Candice Harris. Special thanks to Matt Fonda for editing and mixing our music. Be sure to visit us on the web at BoardGameGeek.com. You can also find us on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitch under Board Game Geek. You can reach us by email at podcast@BoardGameGeek.com. Thanks for listening and happy gaming!